Okay, the next measure I'd like to tell you about is the Wheelchair Interface Questionnaire. This is the one that I think is probably the most useful in collecting large data sets on wheelchair function. And it's one of the ones that we struggled the most to refine and make the right format to be really useful. It's answering the question, is this wheelchair clinically suitable for its user? It's intended for wheelchair professionals to complete. Ideally, it would be a therapist with wheelchair experience and training. It's available for download online in English and in Spanish at the www.atcatalyst.org website under resources. We need to emphasize very clearly with this one, because it is done by wheelchair professionals, that this is not a clinical assessment. This is a research tool. The purpose is to provide valid evidence that can support needed changes. And the needed changes are at two scales. One with wheelchair companies, which is what we were doing, to modify the design or confirm that the design is good. And the other is to facilitate funding for necessary changes, clinical changes for a wheelchair user. For example, does this wheelchair user need a different type of wheelchair for adequate mobility or for adequate postural support? This one does require a person. This is about the person in the wheelchair, really, and their wheelchair. And so unlike the Wheelchair Components Questionnaire, this one, if you're going to use it in the study, requires, of course, subject consent and assent and all that ethical stuff to be done correctly. At the header, we put in the things that we wanted to use in different studies as ANOVA factors. We wanted to know the wheelchair type. We wanted to know the user's diagnosis, gender and age, how long they'd been in a wheelchair. We also wanted to know a little bit about their level of disability. Did they have arm control? Are they usually pushed? Can they sit up without help? We wanted to know the type of wheelchair, obviously, because we were trying to give feedback to manufacturers. This bit here, if you have a different thing you want to use for one of your ANOVA factors, there's no reason for you not to collect that data. And again, this is not meant to replace clinical records in any way. If you're already collecting the minimum uniform data set, this isn't replacing that. These are just the factors for ANOVA. The instructions at the top say indicate your professional opinion. Notice it says professional opinion. This is a questionnaire. It's not a checklist. It's your professional opinion of the user wheelchair interface as it is presently, based on your understanding of its current user's characteristics and living conditions. This is your professional opinion. If an interview is possible, it can be beneficial, but it is not required. We wanted to get full data sets, and very often wheelchair users may not be verbal or may not share a language with the wheelchair professional. Provide your professional opinion by placing a vertical mark on the line. Do not circle emoticon faces. They are only for reference and placing your mark. Mark anywhere on the line. See the examples below. Include at least one complete phrase on the comment line to describe the reason behind your rating. Be specific about situations or parts that you feel may be a problem. For mobility questions, answer as the user is most likely to travel either with or without assistance. If a question does not apply to the user wheelchair interface you were rating, do not mark on the line, but write NA in the comment section and explain why the question did not apply. So we ended up with 3 examples. Over time, we realized we needed to give examples of how to answer in these different situations. Again, we're looking at a shoe because we didn't want to leave leading on any of the wheelchair parts, so we just used this shoe for example. Rate the fit of this person's shoe for their foot. They've given it a poor marking. They said the shoe is too short and narrow, the sides and toe pinch your foot. The next example, for a different person, rate the fit of this person's shoe for their foot. There's no mark on the line. NA, the person does not have a foot. The third example, rate the fit of this person's shoe for their foot, has a very low mark, and it says this person does not have a shoe, but they need one. Their foot is often injured. So if they need a wheelchair part or modification and it's not there, you can still give it a low mark and indicate why. Here are the questions. As you can see, it's a brief questionnaire. The first questions are about pain and harm, centered on the person's body. We wanted it to be answerable for almost every wheelchair user. So the first one is rate how well this wheelchair prevents pain or harm to the user's head and trunk, from poor to excellent, to the user's shoulder, arms, and hands, to the user's hip, buttocks, and thigh, and the user's calves, ankles, and feet. So you can answer if they're missing bits they should have, or if bits are not appropriate, or fit is not appropriate for the different parts of their body. Rate the dimensions of this wheelchair for this user. Does it fit them? Rate this wheelchair's postural support for this user. And really only the therapists are the most able to rate postural support. You'll see when we look at the questionnaire that's for the wheelchair users, it's worded differently because they weren't familiar with postural support, the phrase or the understanding that a clinician would have from their training in seating and therapy. Rate this wheelchair's facilitation of mobility across all surfaces and obstacles this user is likely to encounter. In other words, does it provide mobility on the surfaces they'll encounter outside or wherever? Rate the wheelchair's facilitation of mobility in small spaces. We found that this needed different wheelchair characteristics than rolling on rough surfaces. So we made it separately because also many people live in tiny houses and the workspaces or schools may be very space limited. Rate the wheelchair's facilitation of this user's daily activities at desks and tables. This was pretty universal. Almost everyone will use some sort of desk or table. Even people that may be mentally challenged have very limited upper body still can use a desk or table for some activities. Rate this wheelchair user's facilitation of social contact. Can they sit up and make eye contact? Is it moving them and giving them mobility in a way that lets them make the social contact? Rate the ease of transporting this wheelchair in or on a car, van, or other means of transport this user is likely to encounter. In some places, this is actually a limiting factor. If the wheelchair doesn't fold, they can't use it because they can't take it anywhere at all. In other words, it can only be in their house or in school. Rate the ease of transferring in and out of this wheelchair for this user without help of an assistant. And this one is also a very important and universal aspect. Obviously, there are other questions we could have asked, but we wanted to keep it brief and we wanted to give the ability to therapists to have a voice to wheelchair manufacturers to say what they see working and not working. Here's an example for one wheelchair and its user. This therapist rated the interface between a Modi Go and its user quite low. And here are the comments that explained why. The Modi Go is intended for children that need lateral support and have trouble sitting up, yet it has some limitations. And this is just for this one Modi Go and its user. To make a statement about Modi Gos in general, you'd have to do it with 30. And then you would only know for that location, and you would find out also if they're being prescribed correctly. But you find here, this one, the child is unable to use their arms and hands because there are no push rooms and a high center of gravity. The height causes instability. It's difficult to maneuver due to the length of frame. Chair is too high for a common desk, and in this particular case, the tray was broken. And it's hard to transport, and it's hard to transfer in and out of. But like I said, this is just one Modi Go and its user. To say anything about Modi Gos in general, you'd have to do a study with at least 30 chairs. Here are two of the papers validating it, and it's had both inter-rater reliability and construct and content validity papers published, and it's also been used in studies.